An old house on the outskirts of town had long been the subject of rumors. It was said that something lived in it. Everyone who went in there at night told of strange sounds, a coldness that chilled to the bone, and eyes that stared out of the darkness. A young boy named Danila, a student at the local university, heard the story from his friends. They all debated whether it was true or fiction. "It's just an old house," Danila said, waving it away. "There's nothing mystical about it. If you're so brave, go there at night," his friend Artyom suggested. Danila grinned. "Easy." That same evening Danila went to the house. He took with him only a flashlight and a cell phone. His friends promised to wait for him outside, but they did not dare to come close. The house looked ominous. The windows were broken. The roof was partially collapsed, and the walls were covered with cracks. But there was something about the place that gave them a strange sense of unease. "Just an old building," Danila muttered as he stepped inside. The house greeted him with silence. The floors creaked under his feet, and the walls seemed to whisper something in his ear. Danila shone a flashlight down the hallway. Dust and cobwebs covered everything around him. He walked into the living room. There were old newspapers and broken furniture lying on the floor. Nothing unusual there. No mysticism, he said to himself as he took a picture for his friends. But suddenly he heard a sound. It was a low rustle, as if someone was moving cautiously in the darkness. "Hey, who's there?" shouted Danila, trying to sound confident. There was no answer, only the sound of footsteps that grew closer. Danila pointed the flashlight to the end of the corridor. Something flashed in the beam of light, two little lights that looked like eyes. "Who is it?" Danila's voice trembled. The eyes disappeared, but a strange tension hung in the air. Danila felt a chill run down his back. He decided to turn back, but when he turned around, he saw that the door through which he had entered was now closed. "Great," he muttered, trying to open it. The door wouldn't budge. Footsteps came from behind him again. They were slow, but distinct. Danila turned around and saw that the eyes had reappeared. They were closer now, and it seemed like there were more of them. Was this a joke? He asked, but there was no answer. The eyes began to move, coming closer to him. Danila stepped back, stumbled and fell. His flashlight flew out of his hands and rolled to the side, leaving him in total darkness. There was a whisper in the silence. "You shouldn't have come here." Danila froze. He felt something cold touch his shoulder. Danila sat on the cold floor, feeling something invisible touch his shoulder. He froze, afraid to even breathe. Whispers were coming from loud, but the words were indistinguishable. He fumbled for a flashlight that was rolling across the floor and turned it. The beam of light illuminated the empty room, but the eyes he had seen before were gone. It was just imagination, he whispered, trying to calm himself. But the silence was too honest. Its surface was covered with cracks. He stepped closer. In the reflection he saw himself, but a shadow flashed behind him. "Who's there?" he shouted, turning around sharply. There was no one behind him, but in the mirror the shadow still stood. It was tall, with long arms and glowing eyes that stared at him intently. Danila felt a chill run down his back. He took a step back, but the mirror suddenly cracked even harder, and a low, lingering whisper came from it. "You shouldn't have come in." The whisper was replaced by heavy footsteps coming from the corridor. Danila jumped out of the room and headed for the stairs leading to the second floor. He hoped that there he would find a window or another exit. As he climbed the stairs, he felt something moving behind him. He turned around and saw that the very eyes were standing below. There were many of them, dozens of them. They stared at him without blinking. "Leave me alone," he shouted, throwing. On the second floor, he found a door that was ajar. When he entered, he saw that it was a child's room. There were toys lying on the floor and an old crib in the corner. But the main thing that caught his attention was a drawing on the wall. There was a figure with huge eyes, surrounded by black shadows. Underneath the drawing in red letters was written, "They are watching." Danila felt his breath hitch. "What is this place?" he whispered. Suddenly there was a creaking sound behind his back. He turned around and saw the door slowly closing. The room plunged into darkness. Danila illuminated it with a flashlight, but the light suddenly grew dim. Eyes began to appear in the corners of the room, on the walls, even on the ceiling. They surrounded him, coming closer and closer. And then he saw their master. A creature stepped out of the shadows. It was tall, with long, spider-like limbs. Its face was blank except for its huge eyes, which glowed with an eerie light. "You came here, then you're ours," it whispered in a voice that echoed through the room. Danila screamed, but the sound of his voice was drowned in the whispering that grew louder and louder. The creature reached out to him, and Danila felt a chill run through his body. Coldness gripped Danila's body as if icy fingers penetrated his soul. The creature with huge eyes slowly approached, its shadow growing larger and larger until it filled the entire room. "You belong to us," it whispered. Danila tried to move, but his legs felt like they were stuck to the floor. The flashlight fell out of his hands and rolled away, illuminating the room with a trembling light. "No," he whispered, struggling to pull himself together. When the creature was about to reach him, the flashlight suddenly flickered, and the room lit up with a bright flash. The creature howled, retreating into the shadows. Its eyes closed, and it disappeared. Danila fell to his knees, breathing heavily. The flash of light had left strange shadows on the walls that seemed to move on their own. He picked up the flashlight, which now shone much brighter than before. A thin crack appeared in the hull, from which a faint, almost imperceptible glow emanated. "What was that?" whispered Danila, looking at the flashlight. But there was no time to ponder. The whispering behind the walls intensified, and he realized that the creature had not disappeared completely. Danila ran out of the room and found himself in a long corridor. The floorboards creaked under his feet, and the walls seemed to shrink, making the passage narrower and narrower. He noticed a ladder leading to the attic. He thought there was a faint breeze coming from there. Perhaps there was a window or some other way out. As he went upstairs, he heard something moving behind him. Heavy footsteps, as if someone huge were following in his footsteps. "Faster, faster," he repeated to himself as he flew up the steps. The attic was empty, but in one corner Danila saw an old chest. He rushed to it, hoping to find something that would help him. Inside were old books, candles, and a strange amulet in the shape of an eye. When Danila took it in his hands, he felt the amulet become warm. "This might help," he whispered, putting the amulet around his neck. The footsteps behind him grew louder. He turned around and saw that the creature had reappeared. Its eyes glowed even brighter now, and the shadows around it seemed alive. Danila picked up the flashlight and aimed its light directly at the creature. It howled, but kept moving forward. Then he grabbed the amulet and pulled it forward. "Go away," he shouted, feeling a strange warmth emanating from the amulet. The creature stopped. Its eyes began to go out and the shadows around it began to fade. It reached out its hand to Danila, but before it could touch him, the amulet flashed with a bright light, and the creature vanished into thin air. At the same moment, the house began to shake. The floor cracked underfoot, and the walls began to crumble. Danila ran to the window, which he noticed on the other side of the attic. Breaking the glass, he climbed out and fell to the ground. Behind him, the house began to disappear, as if it was being swallowed up by the darkness. When everything went quiet, only an empty clearing remained in place of the house. Danila looked at the amulet, which was now cold and lifeless. He felt that this place was no longer dangerous, but the amulet left him with a strange feeling. "What was that?" he whispered, rising. The creature's voice sounded in his head. "You belong to us." Danila stood in the empty clearing where the old house used to stand. There was a strange silence around him, as if time itself had frozen. He still held the amulet in his hand, feeling its coldness and weight. "This place, it's gone, but I can still feel its presence," he whispered, looking around. The forest around him seemed normal, but there was tension in the air, as if the shadows were still watching him. Danila hurried back to the city, but even there he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. The whispers he had heard in the house now seemed to be part of his consciousness. When he got home, the phone vibrated. It was a message from his friend Artyom. "So, how's it going at the house? Are you alive?" Danila didn't know how to answer. He stared at the screen for a long time until he wrote, "The house has disappeared. I'll explain later." But as soon as he sent the message, the phone screen went out, then lit up again. A message appeared on the screen. "You didn't escape." Danila dropped the phone, his heart racing. The amulet he'd brought with him now lay on the table. It still looked ordinary, but its surface seemed to glow slightly in the darkness. Danila decided to study it. He opened his laptop and began searching for information on similar artifacts. After a few hours of searching, He came across an old article about a local legend. The Eye of Darkness was the name of the amulet. It was said to bind the wearer to the shadow world. As long as you have it, the darkness can't take you away, but it can't let you go either. So I'm connected to this now? Danila whispered, feeling a chill run down his spine. Late at night, Danila heard a strange sound. It came from behind the window, as if someone was scratching the glass. He approached, but there was no one outside the window. Only in the reflection he saw eyes, the same glowing eyes that had haunted him in the house. Danila bounced away sharply, but the eyes didn't disappear. They stared directly at him until he closed the curtains. This can't be real, he said, trying to convince himself that it was only his imagination. But then there was a knock on the door. Danila froze. The knock was quiet, but insistent. He walked slowly to the door and looked through the peephole. There was no one outside. But as soon as he stepped back, the knocking was repeated, louder this time. "Who's there?" shouted Danila. The answer was a whisper, "You won't escape." Danila realized that the darkness had found him even here. He grabbed the amulet and pointed it at the door. The amulet began to glow again, and the whispering stopped. But now he knew that this was only the beginning. Danila realized that he needed to find a way to break the connection to the amulet and the darkness. He remembered that the article mentioned a place where the Eye of Darkness could be destroyed. The place was called the Lake of Shadows, a legendary place where darkness was rumored to be imprisoned in ancient times. "If I don't get rid of this, they'll come for me," he said to himself as he packed his things. He knew it would be dangerous, but there was no other option. With the amulet in his pocket and determination in his heart, he set out to find the Lake of Shadows. Danila couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was watching his every move. With the amulet in his pocket, he went in search of the Lake of Shadows, an ancient place that was mentioned in legends. It was his only chance to break his connection to the darkness. On the way, Danila recalled everything he had learned from articles and old records. The Lake of Shadows was located in an abandoned valley outside the city. It was said to have been created as a result of an ancient ritual, when mages tried to imprison the darkness in one place. If that was true, Danila thought, then it would mean that the amulet could be destroyed there. But the legend also said that no one who tried to reach the lake ever returned. The way to the lake was long. Danila walked through the forest, which was getting darker and darker. The branches of the trees stretched like claws, and the air was heavy, as if saturated with something ominous. On one of the trees he noticed a strange mark carved into the bark. It was the symbol of an eye, similar to the one on the amulet. "Then I'm on the right path," he whispered. But as soon as he moved on, the whispers began to echo around him. "You shouldn't have come here," the voices whispered. Danila felt a chill run down his back, but continued walking. Finally he came to a clearing, in the center of which was a lake. Its water was as black as tar, and its surface seemed motionless, as if it reflected not the sky, but the emptiness itself. Danila felt the amulet in his pocket begin to heat up. He pulled it out and saw that it was glowing with a dim, ominous light. "This is it," he said, stepping closer to the water. But just as he took a step, a shadow rose from the water. It took the form of a man with huge eyes that glowed like stars. "You shouldn't have brought him here," the creature said. Danila felt his feet pressed to the ground. The creature drew closer, its eyes looking straight into his soul. "Do you think you can destroy us?" it whispered. "We've always been here. We're part of you." "No," Danila shouted, clutching the amulet. "I will destroy you." He rushed to the water and raised the amulet above his head. "Disappear forever," he shouted, throwing the amulet into the lake. As soon as the amulet touched the water, there was a loud roar. The water in the lake began to bubble and the creature screamed, its body beginning to disintegrate. "You made a mistake," it whispered before disappearing. The lake calmed down, and with it the whispers and the cold disappeared. Danila felt his body becoming lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. But on the surface of the water he noticed his reflection, his eyes. They were a little lighter than usual, as if some of the darkness had stayed with him. "Am I free?" he asked, but the answer was only silence. Danila returned to the city. The amulet had disappeared, and with it all the strange phenomena. But he knew that this story had left a trace in his life. Every night he dreamed of the lake and those same eyes, and even though he had defeated the darkness, he knew it would always be a part of this world.